Australian VT Holden Commodore was launched in mid-1997. That means it's now old enough to be club plate eligible for many Australians. The 1997 Commodore was the third generation of the brand Commodore that Holden introduced in 1978 to replace the Kingswood.
Commodore.
The original car was smaller than the Kingswood it replaced, but in 1988, Holden fixed its mistake by making the second generation Commodore, the VN, as big as the old Kingswood. That's the theme they carried through as well with the VT Commodore. It's a big car for a big country. This Commodore was available in a sedan and as a family-sized wagon. Back in the days before blobby SUVs came along, these were the family cars of choice. It was also the first Holden in more than a quarter of a century to be engineered for left-hand drive, which meant this car was designed for export. The standard engine in Holden's VT Commodore was an American-designed but Australian-made 3.8 litre V6 with 147 kilowatts. But, as it has been for enthusiasts all through the decades, the heroes of the range had the V8. The V8 engine in the VT Commodore was a 5 litre V8, and it's a bit of a legend actually. Introduced in the late 1960s, this engine powered tens of thousands of Holdens over the years. Kingswoods, Monaros, Tiranas, won at Bathurst a few times. In 1989 for the VN Commodore, Holden got rid of the carburettors on this motor and fitted fuel injection. It absolutely transformed its power and its performance. Better fuel economy, more power, more punch. That VN V8, in some ways, absolutely transformed the Australian car industry. It kicked off a whole new era of 1990s and 2000s performance. Holden's VN V8 actually forced Ford Australia into developing a Falcon V8. Ford had dropped its V8 in the early 1980s, so the new VN V8 caught Ford napping. For the VT Commodore, this engine got even more power thanks to the Holden engineers. 179 kilowatts, which is a little bit more than the previous 168. That was due to a few hardware changes, a better engine management system, a roller camshaft, better cylinder heads, and an electric cooling fan. The V8 was optional in all the VT Commodores and wagons. It was standard in the SS sedan, which was the hero of the range. And that's the car we're driving today. Holden's V2 was an almost all-new design back in 1997. It retained the engines of the previous car, including the V8 we're driving today, but it had an all-new body shell. The design of this car was based loosely on an Opel product, the Opel Amiga, so the Holden benefited from flush-mounted door glass and a few bits of the suspension. But the result was a totally Australian car. Holden had very high durability standards for its product, not only because they were sold in Australia, but because these cars were sold in the Middle East. That's why these cars have awesome air conditioning systems. I really like the driving position in these VT Commodores. Despite the car's size, it's actually a very easy car to drive. Big cabin, of course, with the good air conditioning system, it means this is a really good family classic. Nice bold interior trim. The seats in these, in the SS, are a little more supportive than in the other models. Previous model Holdens had the option of independent rear suspension. Most of them had a beam rear axle, but for VT, independent rear suspension was standard, and that made these things a much better driver's car. The braking system in the VT was much better than earlier Commodores. Holden developed, with its supplier PBR, a bigger front brake caliper. There was also a bigger disc, which in layman's terms means that the brakes were better. It could get rid of the energy quicker, which means the car slowed down better. In the 1990s, airbag technology became a thing in cars around the world. Holden had an optional airbag in the model Commodore before this one, but for VT, a driver's airbag was standard and a passenger airbag was optional. This car's got both, which means if I crash it today, I probably won't die. Being the Commodore SS, this is the sports model of the range. This was the hero car back in the day. This was the one to be seen in. Part of the SS package was sports suspension. It's what Holden calls FE2. It was a little bit lower and a little bit stiffer than the other models to give the car better handling. Part of the SS package too was 17-inch alloy wheels. Holden's Special Vehicles division had used 17-inch wheels for quite a while in the 1990s, but this was fresh for the Holden product. Even 25, 26 years later, they're a good-looking wheel. Now that these VTs are more than 25 years old, they're starting to get the interest of collectors and enthusiasts. Right now is the sweet spot for buying one of these cars. They're not so rare that you can't find one, and they're not so rare that you can't get parts. But that, of course, is going to change in the next few years. The VT Commodore makes a terrific first classic. It's able to be driven every day if you have to. It's old enough and cool enough to be a sunny Sunday cruiser, and they're not so rare that you can't find a good one. Holden closed down its Australian manufacturing in 2017. That caused a big spike of interest in Holdens. COVID also in Australia made a difference to car club values. A lot of values went through the roof, almost to silly levels. That's now come back to a more sensible level. Now that they're on the horizon for a lot of collectors due to the 25-year H-plate scheme, people are starting to buy the good ones and put them in sheds, treat them as the collector's car that they really are. Another thing that makes these VT Commodores quite appealing for a first-time classic car buyer is the fact that mechanics still understand them. They're not so rare, they're not so old that all the mechanics have sort of retired. And it is a car that you can DIY on if that's what you want to do. Being the performance hero of the Holden range, a lot of these cars were modified early in their lives. But if you want to buy a good one, it's probably best to avoid a modified car. Find something that's standard, find something that hasn't been modified, find something that hasn't been molested. Part of the appeal of owning a V8 is that sound. It just makes you feel good. Some people don't like V8s, but that's their problem. Okay, so it's a nice, fun V8, we get it. These things are actually pretty good on fuel if you treat them gently. These are actually capable of 9 and 10 litres per 100, which is not too much worse than a 4-cylinder car of the same era. But all good things come to an end, and the end came for the all-Australian Holden V8 in 1999. It wasn't all bad news. Holden had a replacement, an all-aluminium imported Gen 3 V8. It's the engine in this, the VT2 Commodore SS. How about this colour? This is known as Tiger Mica. It was the hero colour for the new VT Commodore SS back in 1999. It was the start of a wave of really bright poppy colours from Holden and also Ford Australia. It was a really good time. This engine was all aluminium construction, aluminium heads, aluminium block, but it retained 2 valves per cylinder and 1 camshaft. And back in the day, that was actually seen as a bit of a backward step. In a world that was moving towards double overhead cams and 4 valves per cylinder, this Chevrolet designed V8 kept the old architecture. Gen 3, it always made people wonder what they might have missed out on by not knowing about Gen 1 and Gen 2, but that's a nod to this engine's heritage in America. This thing was a bit of a slingshot back in the day, and it remains quite a fast car now. 220 kilowatts, the power was delivered a little higher in the rev range than the old Holden V8. It was a bit of a thing. This all aluminium V8 was shared with the American Chevrolet Corvette. That's a bit of a sports car. So it made the SS Commodore a bit of a sports car too. 220 kilowatts, it was about 30 kilowatts more than the old Holden V8. These things were a bit of a rocket ship. So let's take it for a drive. Straight away, you know, the Gen 3 is a different car. It is a different animal. About 40 extra kilowatts. Most of that power is delivered up high in the rev range. These cars feel a little bit more flat down low. They don't have that low down grunt, that urge of the 5 litre, the older engine. But you forget about all that once the car gets moving. The 1999 VT2 update was a midlife update for the Commodore. It wasn't actually a complete series change. Obviously the big news was under the bonnet of the V8s, but by this time Holden had actually upgraded its equipment levels, and the VT2 SS, for instance, had 4 electric windows as standard. The interior trim was revised. It was now a bright, punchy orange colour in this car to match the Tiger paint. Also new for the Gen 3 and the VT2 was 2 extra features for the V8 motor. One was traction control. It's switchable. It actually has a little motor under the bonnet which pushes back on the driver's foot if the computer senses wheel spin. The other thing is a power and economy mode button, which actually sharpens the automatic transmission shift points. It doesn't actually change the engine power, but it means that the car becomes just a little sort of sharper to drive through the gears, like that. Both these V8s, the 5 litre Holden and the 5.7 litre Gen 3, were available as automatic and manual transmissions. The 5 litre was a 5-speed, the Gen 3 was a 6-speed. The collector money, the real enthusiasts aim for the manuals, the 5-speed in the 5 litre and the 6-speed in the LS1. Back in the day, most of these cars were sold as automatics, which means if you're searching for one, you might have to look a little longer for a manual. You know what I like best about these SS Commodores? The leather steering wheel. Give me a leather steering wheel in any car and I'm a happy man. I reckon the VT's a really stylish car and it's actually passed the test of time. You look at this now at 27, 28 years of age, the basic styling. You don't see an old car. You see something that still works. VT Commodore was a big success for Holden. It was also a big success for manufacturing in Australia. As well as selling hundreds of thousands of these in Australia, a lot of these, tens of thousands, were sent overseas, in particular to the Middle East, where this car was sold as a Chevy Lumina and its bigger brother, the Holden Caprice, was sold as a Chevrolet Caprice. So, two Aussie performance legends, the 5 litre Iron Line fuel-injected V8 in the VT and the VT2's Gen 3 aluminium 5.7 litre V8. Which one would you choose? Let us know in the comments, and while you're there, like and subscribe. I'm Glenn Torrens, this has been Retro Rides. Stay tuned.